stuff like that.
Well, I mean, this is obviously anecdotal, and I think it's probably a good disclaimer to put this on the table. Um, I don't know that anybody knows what's
Mm.
going to be true 6 months from now or even a year from now. What I
Mm-hmm.
can speak to is today, people still want to go on holiday. They
Absolutely.
still want to leave their milieu, their house, their place, and go somewhere else. And in some ways, the vacations that I'm hearing people want to take, whether they're in Canada or Thailand or Japan, they're kind of old-fashioned in
Mm-hmm.
uh, people just want to go and commune with nature, if I could say it.
Right. Right. Right.
Now, it could be like a fairly common vacation for North Americans, particularly around the Great Lakes and on the eastern seaboard, is
Mm.
to go to the cottage.
Right.
So there's been an interesting uptick in demand for cottage space. I mean,
Mm.
you get your families and your close knit group of friends together who've all been social distancing and who've all been isolating themselves, and you go rent a really nice cottage and you just be together outside the city for a time. And
Right.
I've heard this story now from my friends in the Gulf, my friends in the UK, my friends here in Thailand. So it isn't that the desire has gone away for
Mm.
for a break from the everyday. I mean, I think we all crave that. I don't think that's going to change, COVID or no. Now, what what has had my attention for some time has been my cohort, and I think you would belong to that cohort too, Jayon. We're the folk that take vacations in various corners of the world
Right.
as just sort of, how shall I say, uh, part of our existence.
Yeah.
It's just what we do.
True.
Like, don't get me wrong. Like Rupali and I lived in India for 4 years and traveled extensively through the country, but we did
Right.
go to places that neither of us had ever been before. And I think we kind of reached a point with India where we said, okay, well, listen, we've seen lots of this place, more to see,
Mm-hmm.
but maybe it's time for us to shake it up a little bit. So let's go see what's happening in France, or let's go see what's happening in Japan. I think you and Mona are kind of the same, and I think there's a very significant
Yeah.
number of people around the world who would belong to our group, who, if you tick the right risk boxes, if you offer the
Mm-hmm.
right type of transparency, I think people like us would gladly hop on a flight and go to Malta or to
Oh,
whatever other corner of the world we would deem to be tolerably safe. Now,
right.
flip the coin for a minute, and you might speak to, let's say, segments of the population that are more at risk. And I've seen stories of this nature from people like my mother and from folks who are of that age group. And they're not even willing to go see their own family who
Mm.
might be in small towns far from big population centers, even though they've been socially distancing, because they're nervous about bringing the they may be
Right.
asymptomatic and bring it to a place that doesn't have it. And so I think if you were a tourism ministry and you were trying to decide, okay, well, I need to open back up because my economy is dependent on it and there's so many jobs that are tied to it. I think choosing the right group of people to kind of market to will a save a lot of money, and I think
Mm-hmm.
set expectations a little bit more closely to what would be reality. I mean, I don't know that I would want to be spending a lot of money right now marketing to, you know, folks who are over 65. It's a tough one to talk about.
True. So I have a couple of it is right. But then I have a couple of data points and you know probably some trends that I'm witnessing, and I have a couple of follow-up questions on what you just mentioned. To start off with, you mentioned about people uh, taking their families, hopping into a car and driving down. Just few days back, I think it was about 3 or 4 days back, Brian Chesky, the CEO of Airbnb, actually mentioned the same thing on an interview with CNBC, and he said, oh, it took us 12 years to build build Airbnb, and we almost lost it in 4 to 6 weeks, right? That was the business aspect of things that he was talking about. But when pressed to talk about how he sees travel to be changing, and he says, uh, definitely, travel as we know it is definitely going to change. There are going to be new forms of travel in terms of what is happening currently. So right now, nobody's traveling for business, nobody's traveling for international uh, vacations and stuff like that, right? And it might continue for another year. But what he said is, everyone is looking to hop into their car and drive up about 200 miles and have a domestic vacation, like you mentioned, around the Great Lakes and Eastern Seaboard, and the cottage kind of vacation. And he said, and here are Airbnb's official numbers. May and June first week, okay, the number of bookings in US for Airbnb for houses and cottages has been same as of last year. So that number has not come down. Okay, now as a behavioral scientist, I have this question to you. And do you think that that is going to be a sustained trend for as long as a year or two, till international travel and tourism is banned, or is it that people have been locked uh, indoors for a long time, and they just wouldn't they wanted to get out, and this is a spike? What the numbers that we're hearing Brian mention about in towards May end and June first week, is that a spike? Or let's say right now, if the lockdowns are lifted for a sustained period of time, are we seeing that the 200 300-mile drive down vacations are going to be a, a sustained things in terms of volume?
Well, I think it'd be helpful to first talk about the lifestyle that brings about that type of vacation. See,
Mm-hmm.
the cottage vacation has been a family mainstay for probably my entire life outside of the past, 5 or 6 years living in this part of the world. So
Right.
when I think about summer holidays in North America, I think of a lake.
Okay.
I think of
Okay.
I think of the loon. And so does Airbnb seeing, let's say, sustained demand for that type of property bode or suggest a real sea change in behavior? I'm not convinced of that. At least not for that group. Now that's
Mm-hmm.
like mom and dad and kids and extended family kind of setups, right?
Right.
Now
Right.
I can say that when you're younger, let's say in your days when you're not yet married or you're just a bunch of newlyweds, it's entirely normal to grab a group of 3, 4, 5 couples and go and rent a cottage from the lake. But um, that that type of tenant is less desired by the owner of an Airbnb
Right.
because, well, listen, like you and I were once 25. If we were given
Right.
a lakeside property with a bunch of our friends, what are we going to do? We're maybe going to cause more damage to that property then.
Yeah.
Maybe our cleaning bills will be higher. And so, don't get me wrong, it isn't like left with no alternatives. Would
Mm-hmm.
would I go and rent an Airbnb? Sure.
Mm-hmm.
And I think my wife and I have done that before, and our friends and I have done that as well. But among groups of people for whom renting a cottage is not part of the normal course of holiday planning,
Mm-hmm.
would they then stop wanting to go party in Ibiza or,
Right.
swing on down to Cancun in Mexico? I'm not convinced of that either. I think they might choose to do that because there's not a lot of great alternatives. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
anecdotally, there's a couple that I like watching. I don't know why. They're called Kate and Nate, and
Okay.
they're travel vloggers. I mean, we'll put a link in the comments below. It's my Completely I am not sponsored by Kate and Nate, but
Yeah.
I'll tell you what they did. They'd been traveling to, I think they've been traveling for 4 years, and they've been going around to 100 countries, and they definitely advertised that lifestyle that a lot of
Right.
20 somethings would wish to lead. You know, go to exotic locations and see the entire world kind of lifestyle. Obviously not feasible today, but they went into lockdown at the very end, like the rest of us would have done, and they said, "No, we're not done yet. We don't want to give up this dream of ours." And they did the next best thing. They hired or they bought a van, renovated
Uh-huh.
the thing, and said, "We're seeing the States. We're
Cool.
going to drive around and go see wherever there is to see in the US, and it's going to be cool and awesome. We're going to love it." And so I think for that generation specifically, I think could cottage life be a thing they try?
Hmm.
Yes, but I can also say from experience that there are a lot of people that would define themselves as not country people.
Right.
So
Right.
take
Absolutely.
take your club, take your how shall we say your nightlife people. Once upon
Nightlife
a time,
people.
we
Yeah.
did that. Take
Yeah.
your people that would
I
want to
still
go
do that.
clubbing wherever it may be for a holiday. They want to go party for a week. Dropping them in the middle of the forest. There's bugs out there.
Yeah.
They have to make their own
Hey,
fires.
in India, we have a couple of rave festivals and music festivals bang in the middle of forest. Like the Firefly Festival. I don't know if you know, on the
Yeah.
border of Karnataka and Maharashtra. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So actually, bang in the middle of Karnataka. But I want to pick on something that you mentioned a couple of times. In the context of Malta and next as well. You said that you don't see a lot of either the industry catering or wanting to have a lot of 20 something year olds as guests right now or advertising to them, or these guys traveling. But what I'm observing is that a lot of young millennials and Gen Z are the ones who are actually uh, going out and booking these boutique hotels, these Airbnbs, because number one, they have time, they don't have responsibilities, most of them are not married, and most importantly, the lockdown, they're bored out of their wits, and they want to change in scenery, right? And so what's happening is, and most importantly, the working from home is essentially work from anywhere, right? And these guys are honestly evolving as the digital nomads, the new category of travelers, and these are all 20 odd year olds. Okay. And Brian also talked about the long stays, the bookings which have 30 plus nights have increased on Airbnb, right? And when I talk to my friends in the travel industry, from Bali to Europe, and beyond, uh, everyone seems to be looking this as a trend, and I see that COVID and post COVID, this particular new traveler segment is going to be evolving. Okay. Digital nomads, guys who are going to be going and staying for anywhere between 3 to 6 weeks, work during the day, explore, party during the night, and just get together with a bunch of like-minded people from around the world. And that is going to be a significant part. Now, let's say if you are a hotel owner and different segments, right? 5 star or 4 star, a 3 star, and an Airbnb cottage owner. Uh, how would you, change? Would you, number one, change or cater to this particular segment? Okay, they are long stayers. Their requirements are different. They want 100% connectivity at all times, right? Wi-Fi connectivity, and because they're also working, they're just not vacationing, right? They're working, and how do you see, or how would you recommend some of the different types of hotel owners and hotels to cater to this segment?